Welcome back. Now, so much contact crime is reported daily in South Africa. I'll not recite the statistics. I'd much rather focus on the solutions to so much crime. We're told different sectors of the society must come together to solve these problems. Now, I'm speaking to Mary de Haas. She's a violence monitor. Over the years, she's been watching all stages of violence and how it destroys communities and generations. We're hoping to also be joined by a cultural expert, Mkhulu Nsingiza. Hopefully he'll be able to join us soon. But let me start with you, Mary. Thank you very much for your time here on All Angles. We've seen in the past couple of weeks, these tavern issues that are happening. I mean, particularly on Sunday morning, after hearing the incident in Soweto. Not so long after that, we heard of this incident in Pietermaritzburg and then another one in Katlehong. So many theories are doing the rounds, of course, with our economy, how people are despondent, etc. But what's your theory? What's happening in South Africa right now?
Look, we're a lawless society. It starts at all levels. I mean, if you take the example of taverns, they may have licenses, but the police are nowhere to be seen when they carry on making noise all night, when there's gunshots in the area. You only have to live in an urban area in Durban, near an informal settlement. You will hear them blasting out the noise in complete contravention of noise laws. I mean, that's the lowest level. A local chair of a community, a Red Cans association in an area near the University of KZN says that there are bullets lodged in the walls of houses near the informal settlement. No sign of the police. So, I mean, if you run a tavern, especially a licensed tavern, there are surely laws about it that you may only operate at a certain time. And not only that, I mean, a lot of taverns are associated with drug dealing. So, drug dealing is a huge problem. Organized crime. Organized crime goes right back to the apartheid days, but it's just got much worse. And that is drugs, organized, illicit guns, illicit tobacco. I mean, it's just an ongoing problem. And often organized crime is what feeds petty crime, because people get addicted to the drugs and then they go and steal, or they get caught up in they're employed by a hijacking syndicate, or they're employed by the taxi industry to go and kill people. So, I mean, there's no political will to deal with crime. I wish people would realize that. In fact, we're heading for a police state.
Now, for a country to become lawless, like you're describing South Africa right now, it would mean that, to some extent, the government has a role to play in that country becoming that way. In your opinion, do you think that our government is actually leading by example?
No, I mean, it's quite interesting, that this is more petty crime, but during the apartheid era, people had no compunction in stealing stuff from their employers. For example, you were working for a company that manufactured sport equipment, you would steal some of it because it was not a legitimate government. And I mean, that changed, when there was a legitimate government. But now I think when people see what's happening in their governance, where all this corruption from the top down, they probably think, well, why not? Why shouldn't I go and loot if people say you can go and loot and I'm poor? I mean, if you look at last July, it wasn't poor people suddenly rising up, it was orchestrated violence, but poor people were used for it because they're hungry. And I mean, that is the problem. But I mean, it starts with policing. It starts with having the wrong Minister of Police. And I think if you want to understand this completely unwarranted outburst of Advocate Tefo against the president, you need to understand that Tefo himself has suffered grievously at the hands of Cele, who sent people to arrest him at 4 o'clock in the morning without a warrant, shut him away for 10 days without a court appearance. And Tefo has written repeatedly to the president, Ramaphosa, about corruption in the police and about Cele's role. So I think that's the context people need to understand.
And I mean, like I said in our introduction to this interview with you, you've been monitoring violence, for instance, in South Africa for a couple of years now. Would you say things are getting worse? It seems that way to us. But what do you think?
Look, It's been violent. I mean, it started, I think the real violence took off in the 80s. You know, there were very few guns in townships. I mean, there's always been a gun culture in South Africa among white people. I've always been horrified by it. The number of white people that had licensed firearms. But in the 80s, the guns flooded into the townships and rural areas. The apartheid state did it to fuel the so-called black on white violence, which was state-sponsored violence. Now, there are dozens of arms caches that have never been accounted for since then. But it gets worse because the guns carried on coming in the late 90s. A colleague of mine went up to the border. He could have bought an AK-47 for 1,000 rands. You know, that's the border with Mozambique. And now you've had a proliferation of security companies, and we're not talking about the big registered ones. We're talking about a lot that aren't even registered and have guns, and they come, they go, and the guns are unaccounted for. And these companies are linked in particular with taxi operations. You know, the crux of this mafia state of ours are the taxi mafias. The government has no political will. They basically run this from us. Government's got no political will to deal with it because they've got too many interests in the taxis themselves, both politicians and police. And that's what we're held to ransom by. I mean, it's crazy. There's no political will to tackle the root causes of the violence and spreads. And don't forget, the social factors are indeed another factor. You know, it's no use blaming liquor. I mean, liquor, there's always been fights and shootings. Liquor goes back right to colonial days where people were getting arrested just for brewing beer to keep themselves alive, you know, and criminalized. But it's kind of, it's this proliferation of guns that's made it so much easier to kill people. I mean, how can the police not know where hitmen are with guns when an ordinary person who wants to get her husband taken out can find a hitman?
Yeah,
you tell
exactly.
me, how can the police not know that people with automatic rifles are in a community and can go in and mow down people?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it obvious?
Yeah, exactly. Let's bring in cultural expert Mkhulu Nsingiza now. Just for the viewers to know, he is traveling in a vehicle, but he has been able to give us some time. Thank you very much, Mr. Nsingiza, for joining us. Now, you know, before you joined us, I was speaking to Mary de Haas, our other guest, basically about the trends of crime and how it seems to be getting worse. Culturally, what do you think is happening in South Africa? Is there anything culturally that we can do that we haven't done, possibly, that actually is putting us where we are right now as a country?
Oh, Thokoza Ndlovukazi. I think there are a lot of issues that we omitted that we should have done, especially in '94. Remember that, you know, culturally, when people were at war, when the war is over, kwenziwa lo mkhosi okuthiwa umkhosi wokulahla umkhonto, and inform the ancestors that we are no longer at war. Remember that there are those warriors that actually passed on whilst they were, you know, fighting a battle. And all those people still think that we are still at war. So it's one of those things we still haven't, you know, informed officially the ancestors about, you know, the situation that we are in. And another thing which affects, you know, this whole thing is that, you know, spiritually, African people have actually, you know, moved away from their culture, you know, their belief system. So we cannot find an African solution within the confines of a Western construct. Remember that the governing construct or the governing, you know, system that we are on, it's a Western system. So that is why it allowed so many things to be done, and it has allowed so many things to be ignored, which are very, very crucial to the foundation of building an African nation. And besides the spiritual and the cultural is the socio-economic issue. So, you know, we're dealing with the symptoms. You know, black people are in trouble. Black people are in misery in terms of suffering. So there are so many ills in our communities. Remember that 94 not only affected us, you know, physically. No, apartheid, by the way, but apartheid not only affected us physically, but also mentally. You know, we have these scars, you know, emotional traumas that we're supposed to deal with, you know, in 94 and actually go through a process of healing. But all that, you know, hasn't been done, Ndlovukazi.
Yeah, and Mr. Nsingiza, you know, at some point we had, for instance, your TRC, etc. So I'm assuming that you're not basically saying that that wasn't important in terms of our road to healing, but that culturally there was supposed to be more to actually stamp it. And maybe you're probably saying to me right now that Idlozi is angry right now because there hasn't been anything done since 1994, and that's why more lives are being taken in this way.
No, certainly, you know, ETRC and Ndlovukazi, it was there to actually pacify, you know, the ego of people. But they were not dealing with the real issues that affected, you know, black people. Emotionally, we are scarred, you know, and psychologically, we are messed up. So that is why, you know, as a foundation, the Zinzi Mandela Foundation, we are in this program of decolonizing the minds of African people so that they begin to see the value in themselves. If they know their history, their heritage, that will be part of, you know, the healing as well. Because if you are ignorant of yourself and you keep being told that you have not contributed anything, you know, towards the development of civilization in the world, and yet you are the usherer of civilization. So those are the psychological things that we need to deal with as a nation.
All right, I'm going to ask a question that might come to the both of you before I ask you for a spiritual solution, Mr. Nsingiza, and Mary, for me to ask you for a solution on your side in terms of what we can do with political will, etc. So we were discussing as a team on Sunday, or rather during the course of this week, that on Sunday marked exactly a year since the July unrest. And, you know, all of these incidents, Pietermaritzburg, Soweto, as well as Katlehong, happening on the same day that we saw the civil unrest in South Africa last July. I don't know if you think we're reading too much into it, Mary? It looks very planned.
Look, I mean, that we don't know who's behind that violence last July, but the fault for that lies squarely. The responsibility for it lies with the Ministry of Police, who should have brought the army in immediately to unblock the roads, and because he has actually classified a report that has shown that some members of crime intelligence in this province are running a political hit squad and have attacked trucks before. But I mean, he's the minister who's responsible. I would just like to add a couple of things to what the other speaker has said. I think a lot of people, whichever, you know, I'm an anthropologist, and I know that people operate with different systems. They can be a sophisticated professional, but they're still doing rituals, I mean, to some of them. So I don't think they've disappeared. And I also believe that what we need is a leader like Biko here, because he's quite right. We need a black consciousness type leader to instill the value. But there's another issue here. In this province, I'm now talking here, but also maybe to some extent at Gauteng, because the violence in the 80% from this province to Gauteng, we are dealing with very troubled people in this province. Thousands of kids grew up in this violence and are damaged for life. The damage that violence did to children, what they witnessed, I mean, not just the deaths, their houses burning, shut away like frightened little animals as kids. The damages there for life, we've never addressed that through sufficient trauma. I mean, I was looking at someone convicted of murder, and I mean, he's kind of mentally disturbed. He's got no feeling for other people. And you think, and it was in Maritzburg, and I think of what happened to those kids in Maritzburg in the 80s when the violence levels were intense. So we haven't addressed that either, you know, and I mean, we do it in different ways, but obviously belief systems, rituals are also a very important way. And we need to have a health system that brings all that together. But I mean, the July unrest was orchestrated and it made use of poor people. It sent them off looting because it's easy to get people to loot when they're hungry. But they were the long-term losers, I must tell you. Whoever orchestrated it doesn't like black people because their main source of food, which was the cash places where you could buy bulk beans, bulk maize, were burnt down. They had to travel further. Their banks were burnt. It was cruel. It was cruel. And we don't know who did it. They could do it again.
Exactly. Mr. Nsingiza, you know, I don't know if we're looking too much into it, but it looks like in the past couple of years, South Africa is experiencing deaths at a large magnitude, especially between April and July, right? We saw that in April, we lost so many people in KZN to the floods there. But the year before, we had floods in April in KZN as well. And then there's also July now happening the second time, people dying in large numbers, the same as last year, etc. I don't know if we're looking too much into it, but spiritually, what do you think is happening? And just tell me where lawlessness and spiritual and cultural issues come in together.
Okay, spiritually in Ndlovukazi, according to the African calendar, July is ruled by a principle called Set. Set is the principle of entropy, meaning which the contained energy now gets evenly distributed. It's a principle of chaos and disorder. So we knew that last year, you know, something big was about to happen, but we were not sure what. But, you know, we must look at, you know, this month, July, all the time, you know, so that we are able, because this principle we call Set Umbidlis. It's a principle that is, you know, here to actually bring chaos, you know, until a strong leader emerges again, which will be a connection between ourselves, the sun and the moon, as well as our ancestors. At the moment, we are ruled, you know, by people who are appointed, you know, by a white system that has no connection to our spirituality at all. So until we are able to actually do that atonement ceremony to our ancestors for the insult that we've given them all these years, by, you know, turning our backs against them. Remember that most of the kings and queens, they died in defense of this land. And then now when we take over in 94, we are no longer involving kings and queens. We are now pursuing the Western way of you know, a governing system. That then becomes a problem for us. That is why all these things won't stop until a leader emerges that is going to be able to enhance this chaotic energy and direct it towards, you know, the right direction.
All right, just lastly, Mr. Nsingiza, and I'm going to ask you just to briefly give me a solution. Is it too late for us to do something spiritually and culturally to ask for forgiveness to the kings and queens that died defending our land?
Yes. Can you repeat that, Ndlovukazi?
Yeah, so I'm just asking you if you could just give me your solution. Is it too late for us to do something culturally and spiritually as a country before, you know, to ask for forgiveness to the kings and queens who died defending us?
No, it's not too late, Ndlovukazi. It's not too late at all. And that will require firstly, all these people who are, you know, leading black, you know, people. Those are the people, you know, that know the importance of such ceremonies. So these are the people that to bring together in one room so that we are able to discuss all these spiritual things, because if they are not corrected, you know, I'm afraid that you know, he's not listened to. You know, it doesn't matter. He doesn't care anymore, whatever happens, because he keeps warning the leaders about the importance of these things. to be done, but we still haven't done. I still say, and you know, we need a meeting of all black. These are the people who are supposed to lead this process.
All right, Mr. Nsingiza, we are losing you a little bit, and I did say to the viewers that this might happen because you are driving, but thank you. At least we were able to get quite a lot from you today. Let me end with you, Mr. Haas, in terms of what do you think the solution is to, try and at least eradicate or maybe just, minimize what's been happening in South Africa with so much heartache in the past few years?
Look, I mean, there are multiple factors, and I agree. I mean, look, when we talk rituals and things, we're forgetting that rituals are usually family-based. Families need help. You know, the families were destroyed during the colonial years with migrancy and separation, and there was a family policy which the government threw out. We need to build strong families, strong communities, because that's where this starts. Bringing kids up in the right environment, and that includes rituals. The families are rich. The families in this province are usually clan-based, family-based. So that's a crucial factor, but so is help for traumatized people. That's the social level. Obviously, you can create a lot more jobs if you stop giving tenders to obscenely wealthy people to build houses. Give people site and service and train them to do their own house. Build their own homes and maintenance. That's what you do. You empower people, you give them work. Give them work cleaning up rivers. There's all sorts of ways you can give people work. Train them in gardening, gardens everywhere. I mean, there are all sorts of things you can do at a community level. But in terms of the guns, in terms of these rampant criminal sprees going and mowing people down, the hitmen, you've got to start with doing something about these. The crux of the problem is our police. And if the minister, this minister even overrides the president. The president says to Viso Zulu can have protection. He doesn't get it because Clearly says no. Now, I mean, if the president won't get rid of Clearly, he must stop him engaging in operational matters. And because he's a minister, not a policeman, and he must do something about verification of qualifications, stopping illegal dismissals of good police, stopping cronyism by employment of people who aren't even qualified in the police, checking qualifications, and doing something about crime detections, because it starts, including at a station level. Every station should have a crime intelligence person who's got informers who report back and inform what the policing priority should be. And doing something about detectives, doing something about the delay in getting ballistics reports, forensic reports. I mean, everything's wrong with the police at the moment. And worst of all is the fact that they're getting rid, illegally, they're not even obeying court orders. They're getting rid of illegally of competent, experienced police. And this has been going on ever since Clearly was commissioner. Employing buddies, promoting them above long-serving, highly trained, competent people. I mean, if nobody does anything about that, we'll end up as a police state sooner or later.
All right. Well, thank you very much for speaking to us. That was a conversation with Mary de Haas, as well as earlier we were also speaking to, she's a violence monitor, rather, and earlier we were also speaking to cultural expert Mkhulu Nsingiza.